Kia ora, Aotearoa, and hello world. You are listening to the Yeah Nah podcast, the official podcast of the New Zealand Skeptics. I'm Bronwyn Rideout, and returning this week are my usual co-hosts, Mark Honeychurch.
Hey.
And Katrina Borthwick.
Hello, everybody.
So this week, I kind of went and investigated a offhand comment Mark made about 2 years ago at a random Go Green Expo. Katrina is going to do a deep dive into a fictional award. And Mark, you're going to talk a little bit about some emails that you have received, as well as some new Mormon children's stories that you received from your missionary visitors.
I've been receiving a lot, haven't I? I've been very lucky recently.
I know, lots of correspondence. But before we get into those stories, I guess it's really apropos to give everyone an update on the SGM. We had our SGM to approve our new constitution on this past Sunday, which was March 1st. And again, I just want to publicly thank the members of the committee, as well as those who are part of the broader membership, who attended an awkwardly timed SGM during Sunday dinner time to, give us some advice, make some comments, and of course, support our brand new constitution. Really appreciative of everyone who sort of shows up. And hopefully this week we'll be submitting our application for re-registration as an incorporated society. And I guess also just to acknowledge a lovely email that we have received from our member, Pip Guthrie. She had a chance to go on a tour of the Karori Cemetery, and she got to see Thomas Driver's grave, and she was kind enough to send us some updated pictures of the condition of the grave. A little bit more lichen covering that plaque from the image that I had, which may have been taken a little bit closer to when the plaque was refurbished. But nonetheless, she did confirm my description of it being sort of tucked away and a little bit hard to find.
Yeah, it was also nice to get the photos just as a little check and balance to make sure that you haven't started making up your stories and pictures using AI. It's nice to be able to touch base and get independent verification, because if you do start doing that, any of you that contribute to our newsletter, I'm going to be a little bit grumpy about that.
I mean, I guess that's a great segue that you've given yourself, Mark, into your topic about all the emails that you have been receiving personally and to the committee as well.
I suppose we could see it as a segue like that, yes. So this is an article I wrote where I probably do one of these every 6 months to a year, but it comes in waves where sometimes we have themes with the emails that we get into our collective mailboxes. And this time there were 3 that came within a few days of each other, and they were all asking if we could publish articles by other people on our website. I've had a few of these before, and I've followed up on them in order to try and find out what people want us to publish. But 3 in a very short period of time was kind of interesting. Of the 3, the first one that we received, and they were all sent to different email addresses as well, which was interesting. This one was to media@Skeptics, one was to committee@Skeptics, and one was to newsletter@Skeptics, I think. But this one by Zoe, the first one, she works for Zoe Tremblay Media, so she seems to be a one-man band, but this is on behalf of a company called Media Frog, whoever the hell that is, apparently an online marketing agency, and she asked, we would like to write an article and you will post it on your website. It will be published on your website and you will receive a fee for publishing our work. So this is great. This is being paid. We could get paid to host articles. Now, obviously, I'm not going to do that. We try and carefully curate what we publish, and it's all of skeptical interest. This one promised that it would be, though. The content of the article should be the same as the other content on your website, apparently. So I responded, as I did with all of these, just asking, can I have more information? Can I see the article? If I get to see an example article, that's a really good start. And obviously it's not going on the website, but maybe I can figure out what their angle is. Why are they trying to post content on our website? I think our new articles website is obviously getting a little bit of traffic, and it's probably starting to poke its head up above the parapet, and it is coming up in some kind of stats where people see that it's got a good reputation and it's well enough visited that getting an article on there would be useful. But when I asked this first person, Zoe, what the article would be like and if I could get a copy. She replied with, "Do you accept casino posts? If yes, how much?" So this one was just asking for a sellout. This is basically, we have absolute spam that we want to put on your website. How much are we going to have to pay you to throw your ethics in the bin and just put this thing up on your website? So that one was a bust. Not very interesting at all. The next one was Lily. So Lily emailed me. Lily Allen, apparently, isn't she a musician?
She is. Like, well, that's the name of a musician.
Maybe not
A
the same
singer.
person then. Maybe the Lily Allen that made millions making music isn't the one emailing me. But yeah, so this is Lily, whose email address was lily@trueniagen.credibleoutreach.com. And she said, "Hi there. I came across your site while reviewing health and beauty content and wanted to share a science-backed resource that may be relevant for your readers." Now, this one, we're being told it's science-backed. We're being told it will be relevant, but then we get a link to an article online inside the email, which is great. So I clicked on it, and no, it's basically, it's a beauty skincare product that they're trying to sell. It's going to be another blatant advert. So I read it and I responded and basically said, look, I've read the article. It makes claims, but there's no links to any peer-reviewed research. There's no links to anything that backs it up. If you could rewrite it and just add those links, that would be great. I've done this before, and generally you don't hear from them. They'll say, "Oh yeah, that's a really good idea, I'll do that." And then these people just disappear into the woodwork. And same thing happened with this one, basically. I didn't hear anything back from Lily. Now, the third one is the most interesting one. So the third one came from Mohammed Zafar, and this one basically said, "Hi, I hope you're doing well. I would like to know the pricing for content publication on your website, as well as the cost of link placement. My requirements are as follows." Very specific requirements. Permanent content with do follow links. I think I've talked about do follow links before from a previous email like this. They don't exist. There's no follow links, but there's not do follow links. Article published without any sponsored or advertorial tag. It seems a little bit suspicious. Payment will be made within 72 hours after publication or link placement, and the payment method is PayPal or Payoneer. I hope these requirements are acceptable. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Additionally, if you manage any other websites in any niche or language, kindly share the URLs with me. Note, my article is related to CBD or a general category. And the first thing I thought is, it's CBD. We're talking cannabis. We're talking basically big promises that we've got a panacea. We've got something that will cure everything. But I responded and I said, "Please, can you share with me a sample article that would be similar in content to what you would like to publish on our site?" And I got a response. I got an email back saying, "Please check this article. We need to publish like this." And it was a Word document attached. And the entire article, it just read quite like a scientific article. It was titled Fragment 176191, Emerging Research Horizons of a Selective Growth Hormone-Related Peptide. And it's all about this fragment, which is a fragment of a peptide, a bit of human growth hormone, and it wasn't doing an advertising thing. It wasn't trying to push a product. The thing wasn't talking about, you need to buy this or you need to take this daily. It was very, very technical, like beyond my ability to read it and critically analyze what was going on. But it read like it was legitimate. It looked like some kind of scientific paper, or at least some kind of briefing paper, and it was very sciencey. There were a couple of links in there at the bottom. One of them was just a link to a legitimate paper that had been published. Another one went to a website that when I clicked on it, it looked like it was a lab. And you kind of get a feel for what laboratory websites look like. They had a bunch of products that were for sale, but those products were talking about how they were for research only and not for sale to end users. You could buy it, though. There was nothing stopping you as an individual from buying this peptide fragment that was being talked about in this article that we were being asked to publish. And I kind of scratched my head. It's like, this isn't very good. Like, if somebody landed on this page on the articles.skeptics.nz website, I don't think they'd be infused enough to click on this link and go and buy it. Like, it's not doing anything advertising. What the hell is going on here? And then a few days later, a friend sent me an article, said, hey, you might be interested in this. And it was from the BBC, and it was talking about poisoning of AI summaries. And the more I thought about it, the more it was like, I wonder whether that's what we're seeing with this article. And poisoning AI summaries is basically this idea. It's kind of like, as my friend said, it's like a Google whack. So a Google whack is like a combination of words that is so rare that they might only be on one web page. So when you type it into Google, you don't get thousands of results. You get a single result. And it was a guy called Dave Gorman, a comedian, who came up with this. But there's a similar thing that seems to be going on with AI at the moment, where because we're now seeing AI summaries at the top of any Google search that we do, but because we're getting this AI summary, people are really treating that as if it's gospel. They're treating it as trustworthy. I mean, Google has synthesized all the information and summarized it, but what's not happening is Google isn't checking. So it seems like this is a case of AI poisoning, where these summaries, people are trusting them. People are believing that, what they're saying is trustworthy. But when there's a dearth of information, when there's not much out there, Google's AI isn't smart enough to go, hey, we shouldn't trust this because it's just one thing. It'll still write a summary. It'll still give you that it's found online. If that document isn't true, then AI, which looks authoritative, that looks trustworthy, just regurgitates that one document it's found. And the BBC journalist who wrote about this, he did it where he basically made a web page on his personal website at him and other tech journalists and how good they were at competitive eating, how they were some of the best competitive eaters in the world. And sure enough,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I love that story, and I really want to make that into like a learning activity for like the students I teach, how I can make you the best competitive hot dog eater in New Zealand.
yeah,
And use that as an example of like, no, don't use AI. And also, if you're putting your essays into AI with all these mistakes, you're going to repoison yourself when you check it again 2 or 3 days later.
yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I think it's a great idea.
Because, the first LLMs that we were using, the first big ones that we got used to, they were sometimes months and months out of date because of the time it takes to train. But now they're constantly adding, they're constantly retraining with the newest data. And so within days, these things can start showing up in these AI summaries. And so, yeah, it's really good as an experiment because it's, like, I guess 2 weeks in a row, 1 week you could get people to do this and publish the documents, and the next week you should be able to see the results of it. Basically, obviously, this guy isn't a competitive eater, and all his colleagues that write about tech journalism or write about tech topics, they are not competitive eaters either. But Google confidently tells you, if you search about tech journalists who are competitive eaters, it will confidently tell you the names of the people who are some of the best competitive eaters in the world and just happen to be tech journalists as well. That's very benign. This one isn't a major problem, but supposedly in the wild, the article talks about how they are already seeing companies doing this. They're seeing companies who basically are going onto their websites, finding other third-party websites, putting up these documents about very niche topics, and then using that as a way to build confidence, where it's basically, you should be confident that this product is the best, or, just giving AI these fringe ideas where it'll then basically give people the answer that you want. It will also sometimes put in the right-hand side links, and those links will be to the websites that are trying to get you to visit them to buy these products or believe this thing. And I did this with this fragment 176191. I just typed it into Google. Google gave me a very academic looking summary. It gave me 3 links on the right hand side that are above the fold, and one of those 3 links was to a direct to consumer website, not the same one that was linked to on the article that we'd been asked to publish, but it was the same kind of thing. It said, not for human consumption, for research purposes only, but there was nothing stopping me from basically filling in some contact details, giving my PayPal permission to make the payment, and me receiving some of this. So it seems likely that this is what's going on, that this is what they're trying to do. And then on top of that, a few days after that on the BBC, I saw there was another article about how apparently there is a worrying rise in people who are injecting themselves with peptide fragments. People who are buying these not for human consumption products, and basically, because somewhere on the web they've been told that actually this will keep them looking youthful, they're injecting themselves despite the advice not to do it. And it seems like this article that we got is probably part of this trend. It's part of trying to direct to consumer something that's never been approved by the FDA or whoever else in different countries. You can buy it, it'll turn up at your door, and you can stick a needle in yourself and put some in you. And it's a bit worrying. I mean, the other bit I looked at that I thought was interesting was like, hey, if we're being asked to publish this article, is anybody else being asked to publish this article? And so I picked a key phrase from within it and I put it in quotes and put it in Google. I want this exact phrase. And sure enough, the Seychelles Nation came out. So a very small newspaper, few thousand people receive it daily. And on their website, presumably not in their print edition, but on their website, they appear to have taken money in return for just putting this same article verbatim. And yeah, it felt wrong. Like seeing any news agency do that. And this is a state-sponsored media outlet. They really should be very careful about what they're publishing. But they got offered probably a few $100s to publish this, and they just did it, which, yeah, is a little bit sad and not the kind of thing the skeptics are going to do, except for obviously in the context of trying to let other people know about this. But yeah, that was the last email. It was more of a rabbit hole than the others. I found it quite interesting to kind of put the pieces together. Still might not be true. And Katrina, you found something, did you say?
Yeah, so Seychelles media website, so this is East Africa. There is an article which matches word for word what you've posted up. I don't know whether that's original or not, but it does have some actual research at the bottom.
No, it's fine. So as I just said, the Seychelles Nation, they've just taken money from this same company to publish it. They were asked, will you publish it? And they've just done it. They've not gone, hang on a minute, this isn't anything to do with what we normally publish. They've taken the money and run, from what I can tell. They're not the source. They're just another destination, like us.
I guess I'm kind of curious. I mean, how much money did they get that made it worth it for that company? And did that newspaper actually, did they actually get paid, or, is it too late?
Yeah, it went that far.
Would it be embarrassing for them to complain that they didn't get paid for this article?
Yeah, I never went far enough to ask how much they were going to pay. Have done. The next time this happens, maybe I'll start talking dollar values and see what they're going to start offering.
Inquiring minds want to know, Mark. I mean, what's your virus protection? Because obviously you are clicking every sort of sundry link here.
Yeah, these are just emails. This is not a major problem. And obviously I hover over the links and check, but I don't have anything special. When I do the really weird stuff, I do it in a sandbox. So when I've done like some of the Bitcoin scammy stuff in the past, I've created a virtual machine with a virtual copy of Windows in it, and everything's happened inside there and isolated. And as soon as I've finished, I can delete that, and it's not going to be a problem. But yeah, this kind of stuff, as long as I hover over in the link, it looks okay. I'm pretty happy that I'm going to be safe. And if ever I'm not, I've only got myself to blame, right?
Yeah.
I guess also we're getting lots of emails now about the podcast. Like a lot of these marketing companies that want to advertise the podcast for whatever fee. Are you going to investigate those companies?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of those, and I have just been ignoring those. So they're almost parallel to this, but it's kind of like podcast companies that kind of collect podcasts together, or not. I mean, probably some of them are scams pretending to be these podcast companies and emailing us, and very, very like relaxed, informal conversation, very polite about, hey, listen to your most recent podcast episode. It was awesome. I see you're getting a lot of traction. So amazing of you that you're doing such a good thing. And then obviously they're selling you something.
No reference to the content whatsoever.
Nothing that means they'd actually have to listen to the podcast episode. It's enough of a bug to make us feel good about it. Absolutely.
It feels like a scam to me. I'm just not sure what their angle is, but maybe you just pay the money and they put it in an index somewhere and it gets lost on the internet. I don't know.
I mean, it's probably just inflated claims about their services. And what they'll really just do is put our podcast link on a whole bunch of web crawlers or networks, and it's going to be like for like. Oh, you should mention this podcast and you should mention this podcast. And really, the only person who's making any money will be these referral companies and not the podcasts
That's it.
themselves.
Yeah, we'll take your podcast to the next level. We'll make sure our other podcasts mention you. You just need to pay $1,000 setup fee, and then we can start injecting ads into your podcast, and the money will start rolling in, and you'll get more listeners. And of course, the $1,000 setup fee part will happen, as Bronwyn says. Probably the rest of it isn't going to happen, and will just be $1,000 down. So yeah, and we're not that kind of podcast, right? We're not a general entertainment podcast. We're fairly niche. So the audience we've got is the audience we're going to get.
Maybe this is an audience that actually should hear about skepticism more. Maybe we should consider that $1,000 an investment to educate people.
If it's your $1,000, you can do that. But if it's the skeptic's $1,000, I'm going to be very unhappy about that.
Well, I think we get matched to all the weird sites. So what they'll do is they'll go for the keyword thing, which will mean that we're going to pop up on all these weird, wacky kind of woo sites, which again, I'm not sure whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how it's presented. But yeah, because we report on all that stuff, so they'll just assume we're about all that stuff, won't they? Because it'll just be a word thing. It won't be someone using their brain.
Yeah. Well, hopefully when they do visit our website, when they listen to our podcast, maybe they'll get a little bit of skepticism in them. Maybe some of our rambling will be infused in them, and they'll come out of it a little bit better.
Some of our critical thinking may be infused into their minds.
That sounds good. Yeah, perfect.
So, Mark, in the midst of dealing with all this unsolicited mail, you've actually also received some very welcomed gifts quite recently.
Yes, I have been soliciting as well. And those that have been listening to the podcast for a while know that I tend to have Mormons round fairly regularly. Like every new set of missionaries that come into my area, they like to come and visit at least once. But the current set are tenacious. They're almost every week they're coming round, and I'm quite enjoying it.
They should be podcast guests, Mark.
I don't know. I have a podcast. How do I break that to them? I don't know. And how do I say, oh yeah, we'd love to have you on the podcast because our audience knows about you because I've already been talking about you. That's going to be creepy. I'm not sure I can do that.
They might see it as a really important part of their mission. They'll have a really great testimony.
And it might be really uncomfortable. And we'd only know if we tried it, right?
Would they have computers set up, or would they actually have to come into your house and sit next to you?
Yeah, but yeah, so I wrote another article about these Mormons and some of the conversations. I'll just give you a couple of the examples of things that we've talked about. The first one, which was news to me, was we got onto talking about church finances and me saying that, the church has a lot of money, and they're like, oh yeah, but it's a rainy day fund. And I looked it up, and oh my God, the Mormon church has like $300 billion US. Like this puts it even with about the 50th largest company on the planet. I responded to them by saying that is so much money that, the only rainy day they can be preparing for is Noah's flood, and God promised he'd never do that again. So it doesn't make any sense. But they were surprised to hear this. They were surprised to hear that they'd been fined $5 million by the SEC, and they were surprised just about everything. Like, oh, we can't believe our church does that. And then they tried pushing prosperity gospel at me, saying, because I brought up about tithing, and well, your church seems to take a lot of money, but they're not spending a lot. This is often my line with churches, is how little they do with the money that helps the community. And these guys told me that because I found a really awful sermon with one of the 12 apostles telling people if a destitute family is faced with the decision of paying their tithing or eating, they should pay their tithing. Which is horrific. The idea of it is that the church can provide the food, that tithing is so important. Everybody, like if people stop tithing, maybe more people will stop tithing, and maybe half the church stops tithing. And so they're worried that they're not going to get their money, and that this is a godly thing, that the Bible asks for a tithe. And so they're like, you have to tithe. You also just let us know if you're out of food, and we can give you a little bit to help you. But I pointed out that this is pretty horrific, and what I got in return was, well, if you tithe, you will get back 10 times what you put in. And it was, I don't think that's a Mormon thing. Like that's an evangelical Christian thing, promising the 10 times. But somehow this Mormon had picked it up and tried it on me, and it did not work with me at all. They always offer a copy, and I'm like, no, I've already got 2 copies. I'm fine. I don't need any more. But I also tell them, I've tried reading the Book of Mormon, and it's as thick as treacle, and it's really hard to read. And usually that's it. They say, well, we don't find it like that, but you should persist, and there's a lot to learn from it. There's a lot you can get out of it. But this time, because the pair of Mormon guys that I've got round at the moment, they're being accompanied by an older guy in his 70s, and he's a little bit worldly. He's, had more time on the earth to think about things, and he came out with a really good idea, which is, because I said, is there a simpler version? Is there something that just makes it a little bit easier to read? He said basically, oh, we've got a kids' Book of Mormon. Do you want a copy of that? And he's like, I don't mean to be insulting, I don't mean to be rude, but would that help? And I was like, absolutely, that would help. That would be absolutely awesome. And so they came round the next week with a Book of Mormon Stories, which is a picture book. It's got a lot of pictures, maybe 3 to a page. And underneath each one is a very simplified text explaining what's going on. And it kind of steps through all the different books, all the different chapters in the Book of Mormon, and explains the story. What I was surprised about is it doesn't do it well. As I just said, this is a church with $300 billion. They could pay for someone that could write the Book of Mormon into an engaging story, but they failed. What they seem to have done is just condensed it down to its essence of, they built a boat and traveled across the ocean, and then they've tried to make sure that the language is brought down to a level where it's only really simple words. But that doesn't make for an engaging story for kids. It makes something that easy to read for kids, but it's still boring. I can read it now. I'm not getting stuck on it, so I'm working my way through it, but it's still not an interesting read. It's like whatever joy was in the Book of Mormon, it feels like they've sucked it out for the kid story, and what's left is just this empty husk. But I will read it, and I do wonder if when I then go back to the Book of Mormon, because at least I've got this background, I know the whole story of what the Book of Mormon is trying to tell me, I wonder if that's going to make it easier to read. So it'll be interesting to see if I can then tolerate the proper Book of Mormon, having read my Book of Mormon stories.
One of the things I remember when we went to Hamilton is that they actually had magazines for teenagers. Maybe the next time your missionaries come and visit, you should ask them for the teen magazines.
You and I both looked into that magazine, and was that engaging and exciting? Because I remember it just trying to glorify the 12 old white man apostles.
And that, I think, is fascinating, to make them like these 12 old white men superstars. But now that the prophet that was around back then has died, I think there's a new prophet, or in the process of selecting a new prophet now. And as well, one of the new elders used to be a YouTuber. Not like a singing, dancing YouTuber. Like this is like sort of a middle-aged man who had what was a very popular and wholesome YouTube channel where he was like sort of out camping in I think the Alaskan wilderness or something like that. So there's an interesting crop of elders that, would be interesting to see how the Mormon Church gets involved with that.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to be a bit more engaging. One of the other things I talked about in the newsletter was the Mormon podcast that I'm now listening to, and it's all about Mormon history. And oh my God, they're trying their damnedest to explain why polygamy was okay and now isn't okay, but it is really painful to listen to. Yeah, like you've got this thing where basically Joseph is doing this sealing, sealing, and for him to have plural sealing to multiple wives and other people's wives that he is sealed to is fine. And this is virtuous and fine, but another guy in the church is doing spiritual wifery, and apparently that's debauched and disgusting. It's plural marriage again, but one of them is perfect and shiny and godlike, and the other one is evil, and I can't see the difference between the two, but to the Mormon church there is an ocean between them, and I feel really sorry for them that they're having to try and justify Joseph Smith, who by all rights seems to be or have been a very earthly man with very earthly desires, and make it sound like everything he did was divinely inspired and perfect, because I think he was a deeply flawed scammer. He was a con artist running around convincing people he could find treasure on their property with magic stones that he could look at in a hat. And then eventually he stopped doing that shtick and convinced people that he had golden tablets from God that he could put in a hat and read with his magic stones. Now, I'm still gobsmacked whenever I look into the history of the Mormon church. I'm like, how the hell is it such a big church these days? Like, it's close enough in history that we have enough third-party information that everybody should be able to look at this and go, he was obviously a scammer. He was like an early cult leader. And yet there are millions of followers. And it baffles me every time I look into it.
I guess one of the things I'm kind of interested in terms of particularly the younger Mormons who are coming in is so many influencers and social media personalities are actually from the Mormon church. So in the trad wife movement, I don't know if you guys spend as much time or as chronically online as I am. I know, Mark, you are, but we're online in very different ways.
So my eldest daughter keeps seeing trad wife content on TikTok, but that's the extent of my engagement with it.
Okay, well, there's a former high-end fashion model named Nara Smith, and her sort of shtick is her husband or her kids have a craving for this food, and she goes through this ridiculous process to make like homemade Fruit Loops or, and it takes hours and hours.
Okay.
And their social media is now starting to have images of her or pictures of her reading the Book of Mormon. She's also married to another model who's from a Mormon family. He has at least 3 sisters who are also models. All of them have been sealed in the temple, but he hasn't. So one of the rumors is that he's going to get sealed in the temple and they're going to have a temple marriage. And you also have that show, The Secret Lives of Mormon Housewives, which is absolutely ridiculous. So how might the Mormon church be actually latching onto that?
It's interesting, isn't it?
To attract young people.
Because a lot of it's not under the direct control of the church, and I can imagine the church elders are squirming a little bit, because obviously the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, it all went horribly wrong and swinging and stuff like that, which I was going to say the church doesn't approve of, but of course plural marriage, in some way the church is probably like, oh, it's a return to our roots. But yet the same with podcasters. There's a whole bunch of Mormon podcasters who are kind of like unofficial, and I imagine it's really worrying to the church that they don't have direct control over that. So I wonder whether they're going to start reeling it in at some point, because yeah, especially because of the Mormon history. There's a lot in the past that if people start trying to return to how things were done in Joseph Smith's day, it could get a little bit freaky.
I guess it depends on, if those podcasters are devout Mormon or they are believers in some way. Potentially a way to rein them in is to be like, okay, you get to become an elder. And sometimes when you get those callings to become elders or to take on these senior positions in the church, that can mean that you're sacrificing things like your podcast. Or
Nice. Promote them away from their podcast rather than having to excommunicate them. Have a trick?
Potentially that's just a conspiracy theory that's put out there. But I think it's something to consider that if people are kind of going one way, you can kind of distract them back into the fold.
Yeah. I mean, the podcast I'm listening to, they sound very devout and very, very knowledgeable and run like a private school that teaches about Mormonism. So they're steeped in the history. This is their day job. And yeah, almost too good to be true. Goody guys. And yeah, just listening to them waxing lyrical about Joseph Smith is ugh, not my cup of tea. But I've listened to hours of it so far, and I've got hours more to listen to.
Speaking of cups of tea, let's time travel back to 2024. We've talked about this particular visit to the Go Green Expo, I think several times now on the podcast. Often, however, we're having a bit of a chuckle about the dust up we nearly had at the expo with the company that was selling mattresses and the ridiculous claims about Wi-Fi.
Yeah, the no Wi-Fi mattress that they were selling.
But as I wrote in my article, I remembered, Mark, you made this sort of offhand comment, which I have been ruminating on for years, clearly, because it was just everything was mushroom. It was mushroom tea, mushroom coffee, mushroom chips, mushroom-shaped candles. I guess my favorite product is, the grow your own mushrooms, because that's actually practical. That's just food. You're just growing your own food in your house, and I kind of like that.
Whereas a lot of this is powdered, healthy for you, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, those kind of like lion's mane, shaga or shiga, reishi, and turkey tail, and there's another one, cordyceps. They're kind of called functional mushrooms or adaptogenic mushrooms, which sounds really fancy, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, you had this really offhand theory, which sounds quite elegant, which was with the 2020 referendum on marijuana legalization not going through, you were kind of curious as to whether this growth in mushrooms, so to speak, was related to people who weren't going into the medicinal cannabis business, but maybe was hoping for the legal cannabis business to kick off, needing to do some sort of pivot so that they wouldn't lose out on their investment.
Yeah, I'd certainly heard of a few companies in New Zealand that had kind of been heavily investing before 2020 and crowdfunding and seed funding and, buying up lots of hydroponics equipment. And it was like, well, something happened. Like, all that investment they will have made preparing for the referendum, something will have happened at the point where we didn't vote to legalize marijuana. What the hell did they do that they didn't just go bust?
So I was looking into that, and largely what I found was about companies that were going into the medicinal marijuana business in the lead up to the referendum, which is kind of different from the people who just wanted to sell legal cannabis. So we did have companies like Cannabis South or Canna South, the company that's now Rua Bioscience, which I think was Hikarangi, and there was another company. There's three of the companies, and they were sort of profiled quite heavily in terms of they were building up for the medicinal marijuana, and medicinal marijuana is legal under very tight circumstances, and also it's very tight circumstances in which you can be a grower, seller, producer, manufacturer, supplier, etc. And yeah, I was kind of interested in seeing whether your theory worked out. It seems that the medicinal cannabis companies largely were able to stay in medicinal cannabis, with the exception of, say, Canna South, which went to receivership in 2024, which was the year we were at Go Green. But it seems that with the mushrooms, we were a couple years behind the trend because it was a big mushroom trend, not only in like food, but also, and always in drugs. Magic mushrooms are, a perennial favorite now, but there was a trend in clothing, in home decor, post the COVID, post lockdowns. There's a lot of interest in cottagecore, growing your own food. Mushrooms pretty generally easy to grow and easy to forage in some places. It was also a year where they had really great weather for growing mushrooms in certain parts of the US. So you end up also having a potential like increase of crops. So of course, what are you going to do when you have an increase of crops? You got to try to find a way to sell them. So you have all these companies coming about that are trying to find really creative ways to deal with this excess mushroom that, yes, it's a fungi, but also your fungi are vulnerable to really bad mold. So you got to find some way to pulverize it, store it, dry it, and turn it into other products and sell it. And it seems that that's what a lot of companies did. This is kind of where we get a lot of those teas and elixirs. But the big mushroom that has been studied has been something called lion's mane. And that's been interesting to see how that's applied in New Zealand, because the species of lion's mane that we have in New Zealand isn't exactly lion's mane. It's like a completely different species of mushroom, but it looks similar to lion's mane, and that's why we call it New Zealand's lion's mane. If you see a company making a claim about lion's mane within their New Zealand made product, you should double check and see if they indicate if they're using New Zealand products or if they're using an imported lion's mane, because no studies have been done on a New Zealand species of mushroom. And that's a really big difference that we have to talk about in terms of any conversation we have about herbal medicines or natural medicines or, your alternative or complementary therapies, is because there are so many different species of plants that have the same name that anytime a lab does experiments, you have to look very specifically at the name of the actual scientific name of the plant being used, because you cannot apply the findings of one species of plant to another member of that family. They're very different in terms of the outcomes or any benefits or any harms. There can be actually some very significant differences. So when you look at the science that I was able to find regarding lion's mane, some of it's really, really interesting, like the idea that it can fight cancer, that it can fight MRSA. That's really, really cool. But again, if you're in sort of that lab production, laboratory science, you're taking like probably a large amount of mushroom and refining it down to like maybe a couple of mils of oil. So you're, just having a mushroom steak or, no, sorry, just having mushrooms with your steak or mushrooms in your salad, you're not going to get like really the same benefit as you would from what is probably like, 1 pound of mushrooms that's been synthesized into like a couple of mils of oil.
I know when I had coca leaves in South America, they said in order to get a cocaine effect, you would have to eat a room of cocoa leaves. And that's how, concentrated cocaine is. And so I imagine it's a similar thing. You may need to actually eat a room of mushrooms in order to get some of those medicinal effects or something like that, which is not possible.
No, it's not possible for your stomach. It's not going to be possible for your body. And it will come to a point where, all the benefits of the mushroom, you may actually have to think about what are the parts of the mushroom that actually don't work well for your body and have to deal with those negative impacts. So again, there are a couple of big companies that I've been seeing lots of ads for. One is Mind. They actually did have an article written by the New Zealand Herald about some of the research that they're doing. And then the other company is Flow State. Now, Flow State was the first one who put out an ad saying, hey, be careful. If they're saying that they're using lion's mane in New Zealand, that's not the same species that they've done all the science experiments on. So that's a really interesting level of honesty. That's kind of an interesting pitch. And now, just in the past couple of weeks, I've now just started to see the same ads being put out by Mind.
Love it.
Making the same.
So trashing basically the local companies because they're growing the local lion's mane, which from what your article says, it's illegal to grow the international lion's mane in New Zealand.
You can import like the dried product. Yeah. Like you can't bring like in fresh spores. You can't bring in a fresh plant, but you can like use whatever, like an extract or something.
So these two companies are doing that, I guess, buying it from the US or somewhere and packaging it, whereas the local company...
I think they are using the New Zealand stuff, but they're just saying right out front that we're using the New Zealand stuff. And if anyone's telling you that they're also using New Zealand stuff and making claims based on the science that the experiments have been done on the actual lion's mane species, they're not being honest with you.
Right.
That's what they're doing.
Okay.
Mark, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable with my article. I just thought it was such an elegant idea. And I'm like, it'd be really cool if that was what was happening. And potentially it is. I mean, no one's really going to necessarily come out and say, oh yeah, we're going to go legal marijuana. And then the referendum doesn't work. Who would admit?
Yeah. It's a good uncomfortable.
It's kind of different. It's kind of different growing conditions. So with marijuana, they kind of go out in the open, and I know they or whatever.
You actually use the same equipment, but it's a different environment. So one needs less humidity, one needs more humidity.
For some reason, I thought mushrooms had to be kind of in a dark environment, and that you needed light for, trees and things like marijuana.
It's about the tents, right? The tents and that sort of equipment. So yeah, maybe turning on and off a light, but what you're really doing is dealing with the humidity and temperature.
Right. Okay. So tip for people there that need to repurpose their
grow setups,
basements.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I imagined in my head was that the lighting's different. Obviously, marijuana needs a lot of light to grow quickly and grow well, whereas I imagine mush need less or sometimes no light. But the irrigation and the temperature control and all that kind of thing, as Bronwyn said, it'll be similar equipment, same equipment. So I can imagine a lot of it's useful, if not all of it, marijuana to mushrooms. But it sounds like it's not happening. And Bronwyn, no, you made me uncomfortable in a way that's good. I have this pet hypothesis. I'm not even going to call it a theory. And I was too lazy to look it up and find out if it's actually what happened. And you did the work. You were a better skeptic than me. So yeah, I need to just sit there and wallow in my uncomfortableness and take home a lesson from that.
We can always go to this year's Go Green Expo, and maybe you can think of another pet theory I can take apart.
If my fragile ego can cope with it, maybe I will think of another one. I'll look for what's popular this year, and then I'll come up with some crackpot theory as to why it's suddenly popular. Like, I mean, we've obviously already had turmeric. Turmeric's been and gone, I think. But there'll be something else at this year. So yeah, let's do it.
All right. And now for our final segment of this episode, I hand it over to Katrina, who's going to talk about a fictional philology award. Take it away, Katrina.
Yeah, and just a bit of a forewarning. It's you sort of write an article and then realize you have to talk about it, and it's got all these words that you may or may not be able to pronounce. So that's going to happen. But this is interesting because there is a fella called Florent Monteclair, and in 2016 he got the gold medal in Philology, and that was awarded to him by the International Society of Philology, and that award was equated with the Fields Medals or a Nobel Prize. Also, we'd have a sync, and 3rd of February this year, it turns out there's a preliminary criminal investigation opened in France into his actions, the actions of Monteclair. And those allegations are forgery, forged documents, taking up a title of a diploma or qualification that he wasn't entitled to. And this was reported in a French publication, which is the Les Républicains, which is all in French, so it could be missed. I think it is starting to get picked up in some of the English media now. But the more I read about it, the weirder it gets. But I think before I get into that, I probably just need to explain what philology is, because that's not a word I've come across very often. And it's actually just study of language from historical and written sources. And so it's sometimes used to work out whether a document might be authentic or the real thing or what the meaning was. And so it's related to, but a little bit different to linguistics, because it's looking at the evolution of language through time, whereas linguistics tends to look at it, the structure and the theory, the social culture at a particular point in time. But the difference between them is a little bit fluid, and some people would say they're just two different approaches to linguistics. So basically it's about old texts and stories. And so this is what Monteclair is studying. So on the 18th of December 2015, the Les Républicains lauded Monteclair's achievement in obtaining the award. So they did a big article and said, hey, this guy's got this award, this is amazing. But there was no coverage anywhere else in the mainstream media, which is really weird. So there was a prize that was equivalent to the Nobel Prize. You would expect that there would be some sort of international coverage or some sort of mainstream coverage, but it was really just covered in this one news outlet. And, he did get the award. There's a photo of him standing with some prominent people having the prize handed over. And in fact, the person that's handing Monteclair the prize is the Minister of Interior and Defence in France, and he was the first president of the Court of Auditors. And then there were a number of other people also in the photo. You get the idea. There's a photo of him getting this award from these important people, and so that's great. So he's at the National Assembly getting that, which is a very important building in France, and you can't just go and book it. You need to go through your parliamentarians to get there, and so you need to have a pretty good reason to book that and get all the important people along to that. And because he got the Philology Award, the mayor of the Montbéliards decided to give him the city medal. So this was awarded a few months before the ceremony where he got the award, so they knew he was already going to get it. So we got another photo of him holding up his award from, the city medal from the mayor as well. Well, this is all great. But what happened is for some reason, this 5-yearly award became yearly, which is a really weird thing to happen. And in 2018, that's the next year after he got it, it went to a fellow called Eugen Simeon, and he is a Romanian academic. He's since died a few years ago in 2022. But because that was a Romanian academic, a Romanian Germanist picked up the story and started asking some very awkward questions. And as they went along and dug, they started finding some really unsettling facts. And they went to press in January 2019 and kind of basically broke the scandal. And so basically Monteclair, he wrote his PhD, his doctorate, on Jules Verne, and he specialised in Verne's writings as well as vampires. Those were his specialisms. But it looks like his fictional interests don't end there, and he seems to have made up the gold medal in philology. It doesn't exist. But not only did he make up the medal, but he also made up the international society that awarded it, the International Society of Philology. And then it gets better. The award committee is chaired by the chancellor of a fictional university that he also made up, and has previously been awarded to a bunch of people who are mostly dead, except for one person who's never heard of the award or the society. And the letter that is informing others of the awards ceremony is signed by Monteclair, the guy who gave himself the award, and another individual. And if we dig into that, it appears that that's his pen name, because he writes fantasy fiction on the side, and he used a name called Martin Belmont, and that's the other signatory to this letter. So it looks like those two are the same person, and they're both signing this letter announcing this award. That same letter refers to a non-existent UNESCO centre, and that has a mailbox at the door of Monteclair's family home. And also, that UNESCO centre is the printer of Monteclair's fantasy novels. Add to this, there is an investigation that had been open previously because the French ministry approached the authorities, and they did that because Monteclair had tried to claim a doctorate. So what sometimes people do is they get a doctorate or some kind of qualification overseas, and then when they will come into France or another country, they say, my qualification is equivalent to your qualification. So what he'd done is he'd approached the university asking for a doctorate with a qualification he'd obtained at an American university. The only problem is at the same time he was saying he'd never set foot in an American university. And he said he did his work by correspondence and he got his diploma by post. So nothing suspicious there at all.
Hard to tell because, I mean, it is like maybe if not by post, then certainly nowadays you could actually do an entire PhD without setting foot on campus because you are doing your meetings with your supervisors online. You can get all your books online. I would have to know more, but that's not necessarily, that's not quite a red flag for me.
Yeah, I think the problem is that the university didn't have any records of him, which is a bit of a downer when you're trying to claim equivalence.
That's more important that he has no record, but that he never set foot on campus. I probably went to, like, in my entire PhD, I probably set foot on campus like maybe 10, 20 times over 3 years. And that's just because I was able to do almost everything I needed to do online.
I guess I'm not sure whether online existed when he did his PhD. I haven't sort of looked into his age, but possible. Although looking at the circumstances around this guy, I wouldn't put it past him that he's actually made something up. So you've got this fake award and this International Society of Philology, and they've still got a website which is actually live and it's still up there. It has some spelling mistakes and things that show up in it, which is probably not surprising given what you've heard. And it talks about the fact that this is basically backed by the University of Philology and Education. So that's quite prominent. So the medal committee is chosen by the exec committee of the society and is chaired by the chancellor of that university, which we now know is fake, but also the other members of the committee are anonymous, and we don't know who they are until the award of the prize at Congress, which I don't think has ever happened at Congress. And so that's an interesting website, but it turns out that website is hosted by an organisation in France, the web hosting, and the web host has the same hosting as the university, which is in Delaware, and also the UNESCO organisation. So that's starting to look a little bit suspicious that they're all using this web hosting in France despite not all being in France.
Especially, I presume, is happening. It's all on the same IP address. If it's all on the same physical server, that would be like really odd for three random organizations to all end up on the same server.
Yeah, and in fact, they've got address in common. So if you look at the address that is on that letter with the award, when I didn't include that in my article, it's all in French half, but it's a bit hard to see. But I got the address and kind of Googled that, and you can see the university. Some of the addresses are shared, and so if you Google them, you can see that the UNESCO organisation and Montclair are in the same place. And there was an interesting picture of a car park that you get when you look up the University of Philology. I'm just not quite sure what was going on there. We get to see, when we look up his address, you can see sort of a leafy avenue I had a look at it on Google Maps with some, nice fence posts. It's got quite a nice house in the countryside there, and you turn around, you can sort of see a farm seen across the road, and that is supposedly the UNESCO organisation. But not only UNESCO, but also the AS Group Études de Formation de Recherche Internationale, so that's the Associated Group for International Training and Research Studies, Jeffrey. They were there, but they've never filed any accounts. Also, Agnes Galliard, a foot reflexologist, has the same address and is still advertising that she's doing business there. Maybe that's his wife or something. And this is all just basically his house. And according to the prosecutor of, this university problem he's got, the American university has no other existence than a website created in 2015, closed in 2025, no identifiable physical establishment at the address indicated in Delaware in the US. And the Learned Society would also be based solely on a website, also created in 2015. As for the Besançon Association, that's another one, domiciled at the Florent Mondeclerc's family address. It would have used the term UNESCO without official accreditation. So, whole lot going back. So I'm just gobsmacked about this guy. Now, it turns out there was an award. So he says, look, one of the people who's actually alive got this Philology award in 2017. He's still very much alive. And that's Noam Chomsky. Now, Noam Chomsky can't recall it at all, which is weird. But then another guy somewhere else on the internet posted a picture, a photo of him holding a medal with no Chomsky beside him. And I thought, well, that's weird if he never got the award. What was this? Was this an award that was going to someone else and he was on the stage? Well, blow me down if there isn't a video online. They've actually put all of this conference up online into little clips, and there's about a 1.5-minute clip of when he actually gets this award, which I managed to find. And this is not at the National Assembly. This is at the Centre Wallonie-Bruxelles in Paris, and where Noam Chomsky was hosted for a speaking engagement in late November 2016. And this was after he got rejected by a number of venues due to some controversial views. So Noam Chomsky is sort of known to be given political views. I didn't dig down into what all of those are, but I think sometimes he does annoy people. So I got the video, and in that video, indeed, you have Montclair giving Noam Chomsky a medal, but the way it comes off is very much like, when you have a speaker and they come and you give them a bouquet of flowers or a box of chocolates after they've been talking, it comes across very much like that. It only lasts, it's maybe a minute or less. And he just says, the Linguistics Society decided for its 50th anniversary to award the medal to a person who's most distinguished himself in grammatical thought. So I'm going to be a little bit official. So well known, the Association of Philology Society is very proud you have accepted this little laureate. And finally he shouts, bit of philology, and it can be verified. All I give you today is the gold medal live and in this audience hall. So that's my translation of his French as best I can. I think that's him trying to say it's equivalent to a Nobel, but you can see it's quite a casual kind of conversation. He sort of hands the medal over, sort of Noam sort of takes it in a wobbly kind of way and goes, oh, thank you, and just takes it, and that's the end of that. So I think that's what he's done, and there's that photo of him and Noam with the medal, and he is trying to sell it as if that was, this grand award, which it wasn't. What I can't get past, though, is that photo right at the start with all these important people at the National Assembly. And I was, try as I might, trying to work out how he managed to get in there. So he must have got a parliamentarian on his side, but it turns out nobody at the National Assembly really remembers anything. And apparently they don't keep records of such things. So any bookings have to go via parliamentarian, but there's one said they were actually attended, but they said they weren't contacted to organise the ceremony. So short of that parliamentarian being a liar and maybe having something to do with it, I can't work out how he managed to get into this really important building and, get there and get this award handed to him. So that mystery will remain, and that will be something I will be digging on in the future years to try and work out how that guy managed to pull it off, because that's a pretty amazing achievement.
Thank you, Katrina. It'd be interesting to see what else you will find as you continue your investigation. Now, it's almost time to say goodbye, but before we do, just a brief membership corner. The next Wellington Skeptics in the Pub will be on Friday, March 20th at 6 p.m. We are back at the Intercontinental Hotel on 2 Gray Street. The lobby lounge has gotten a facelift with new carpet and furniture, so come have a nosy and say hi to our dedicated group of Welly skeptics. The next Auckland Skeptics in the Pub is going to be at the Dyson Fork on April 7th, and they start at 6:30 p.m. Early bird tickets are still on sale for our annual conference. This year, the conference is going to be held in Christchurch from July 31st to August 2nd with our special guest, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. So get your tickets by visiting conference.skeptics.nz and then following the link to our Humanitix website. And finally, just our annual reminder for listeners who are also members of the Skeptics, this is the time of year where many of you will receive your reminders of your annual subscription. Basically, this automatically renews and deducts a subscription fee from your bank account. So if you see $20 or $40 being paid to us, that's what's happening. If you have any questions about that, or you actually want to stop your subscription, please email Tim, our lovely treasurer, at treasurer@skeptics.nz, and he'll be happy to help you out. Now, if you have any comments, questions, queries, kudos, or concerns, please email us at news@skeptics.nz or podcast@skeptics.nz. That's all for this episode of the Yeah Nah podcast. We'll be back with more skeptical news in a fortnight. Ka kite!
Until next time.
Bye.